officially underway at Olympic Stadium in Montreal on a landmark day for Canadian soccer. Now Hudson Camera to the ball forward and helped on by Bernier. Dominic Adoro is in here. It's Adoro for Montreal, and it's the former Toronto FC player who opens the scoring in the first leg at Olympic Stadium.
It is Sportsfeld Storytime. We are taking you back to, what a time it was. 2015, 2016, 2017. We had no idea. As we are in the 2020 streak, I'll say this. I've grown even more fond of the 2015 to 2019 run of Toronto sports. I don't know about you.
You're right. I think that we didn't appreciate how good we had it from 2015 to 2019.
Obviously, the Blue Jays exploded onto the scene. Obviously, that was a huge deal. But at the same time, in the background, I think the team that sort of was the first team to push to the next level and achieve the great success and actually pull it off is Toronto FC. We are looking back to the 2016 MLS Cup playoffs, the Eastern Conference Finals, specifically the second leg, but basically the entire conference final against the Montreal Impact, a team that I guess quietly is one of their biggest rivals. I guess I didn't realize it had happened, but if you look back, they had been eliminated by them the year before in the knockout stage. Obviously, they always play in the Canadian Championships. We had spoken in the previous week that I think as a Toronto FC fan and as somebody who worked in sports media, Toronto FC was always the team in the MLS that got a lot more coverage. I'm sure it was different in Montreal, but that even nationally, I feel like you heard about Toronto FC a lot. They had the bigger players, they had the headlines, and they sort of got Rogers and Sportsnet that was sort of behind them, TSN as well. You didn't hear as much about the Impact, and I think you see that rivalry play out in full in these two games.
Yeah, and in a game that we'll talk about next month as well, there's a real 8-month period where it was like the Toronto FC Impact rivalry was bananas. And the way you can see it, it's one of those fun rivalries that you saw with Blue Jays Rangers for a couple years. You saw with Leafs Bruins for a couple years, where just you can really see there's animosity amongst the players, which not saying I'm saying players should fight, but I appreciate a good rivalry where it's so intense that the players are into it too. There's a moment in the Canadian Championship in 2017 where it's just oh, okay, these teams fucking hate each other, and it's awesome, and it just heightens everything, and it heightens the fans' reaction to it, heightens the crowd, it heightens the stakes of the games, and it's just great. The Toronto FC Montreal rivalry in 2016 and 2017 is some of the most fun rivalry stuff that I've followed in my sports life. It's great.
And for things to come up, they have to go down. And the first game in November in Montreal, I thought this was a typo the first time I saw it when we were looking back at this. 61,004 fans in attendance at Olympic Stadium. That's crazy. As somebody who, maybe if you're a fan and you don't follow MLS, you think, or if you do, and like I mentioned before, it seemed like Montreal was a team you didn't hear as much about. The fact that there were 61,000 people in attendance for a MLS playoff game is incredible.
Yeah, I remember, I guess it would have been the beginning of the next season. So the start of the 2017 season, I was in Montreal doing the play for the first time. And one afternoon I had off, and it was a regular season game. Might have been the first game of the year or very early into it. And it was TFC in Montreal. But it was it wasn't a high stakes game. It was just, I think, the first meeting since the conference finals, and bars were packed and people were mad. It really kind of took over the sports scenes in both cities in this really kind of cool way.
Also, a small note in this match, remembered for the fact that the penalty area was drawn too small.
That's right. I forgot about that. They measured it, and they had to measure it.
Olympic Stadium, my friend. Only in Olympic Stadium.
Was it Vanny that went out and like pointed it out, and they had to? What a shitbox! But it can totally support Major League Baseball, though.
Anyway, things get worse from there. Toronto falls behind 3-0. 53 minutes in. Oduro, Mancosu, and Oyongo. Jake, where did you watch the first leg of this from?
I actually don't remember. I think I was at home. I think I was on my couch for this one. And I remember the mood not being great at halftime, especially because Montreal, I believe, were like, they had gone through the knockout round, I believe, this year. And TFC were TFC were third, Montreal were fifth. But TFC finished 8 points ahead of Montreal. So it was kind of one of those, we should not walk, but it was like, because Montreal upset the Red Bulls in the conference semifinals. And that gave one of those like, okay, we avoided the juggernaut team kind of feeling.
Yeah.
Like we got the good draw here, especially because we as we talked about last week, TFC smoked New York City FC. So it was like confidence was high there. And then they come out just stinking. and to your point, a hostile 61,000 people. And then it's 2-0 at half and 3-0 8 minutes into the second half. And it was like, oh no, it's happening again. And like TFC fans had that sort of very Toronto, like we're cursed kind of feeling. It never happens for us, etc. And it was just like, oh my God, it's going to happen again.
After falling behind 3-0, they bring two really important goals in the grand scheme of things. Altidore scores in the 68th and Bradley in the 73rd. So they leave Montreal with 2 away goals down 3-2.
I remember watching when this game was happening and watching this game. I remember when, I think it was, when Josie scored the first one. It was like, okay, 3-1, get 1 away goal. Then you just have to win 2-0 at home. Like, whatever. This is like, that's doable. And then Michael Bradley scores in the 73rd, 5 minutes later. And then I remember it was like, it was the most excited I'd been for a loss. If that makes sense. So it was like, oh, it's only 3-2 with 2 away goals and we're better.
Yeah.
So it was like that Bradley goal was huge. And it really felt like because those goals were within like 5 minutes of game time, but like within 2 minutes of each other in actuality, it really did feel like despite the fact that we were down 3-2, it kind of felt like TFC had the momentum going back into the second leg. And I remember thinking when Bradley scored like that, I remember the thought was like, that could be really big.
I don't think anything could prepare you for what would happen 8 days later on November 30th in front of a record, I will say, 36,000 fans at BMO Field. A terrible day, by the way. Wet.
Yes. Shitting rain.
A wet November day, rainy and crappy. What do you remember about this one?
So I watched this game at a bar that no longer exists. You've been there. Was one of the worst bars in Toronto. Bar was called The Beer Station.
Oh, Lord.
On Bloor. I was going to go to this game, but ended up not because my rec dodgeball finals were the same day.
Wow.
And my game was at 6 and the TFC game started at 7. So I was like, okay, I can do both, whatever. And expecting to be able to just go to the usual sports bar that we went to after our games to watch with a good crowd. And all the bars on Bloor Street were packed for this game. And I was really surprised and very much like, this is not, I didn't think that TFC would garner this kind of response. And so we ended up at the Beer Station because it was the only bar that had any capacity. And they barely had capacity. It was crazy.
And boy, if you were optimistic about the 2 away goals.
The veteran Canadian midfielder gets it forward for Mancosu. Kosu. Piatti is out to the left. Beitashour trying to track back. And Kosu finds Adoro. It's Adoro! Dominic Adoro scores again, as he did in the first leg. The former Toronto player returns to BMO Field.
Now, on aggregate, they're up 4-2 with another away goal in their pocket.
I don't want to say it's underrated now because I think it's gotten its due in the city, but this is one of the craziest Toronto sports games ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, it was 1-0 Montreal, 4-2 on aggregate. They get the one away goal, and it's like, okay. But then Armando Cooper scores in the 37th. Josie scores in the 45th on like one of the best headers off a corner kick you'll ever see. In the playoffs, he scored once against Philly in the knockout round. He scored twice against New York City FC. And then he scores twice again against Montreal. And then the next year, obviously, he scored all the big goals in the finals run. But he is just a monster.
Montreal comes out in the second half and like
trash weird goal.
To the far side. Played in towards Piatti. Picked up by Venegas. Through for Piatti here. Nacho Piatti! It's in! Montreal have the goal that ties it up on the night at 2-2.
Just wildness. Piatti, he scores. Now it's 2-2, but on aggregate, it is
4-4. No, 5-4.
5-4, plus they've evened up the road goal. So Toronto has to win this game. 3-2 ties it, basically, is what the logic is. And it's Nick Hagglund, of all people. The defender Nick Hagglund scores in the 68th.
With a crazy rising header just above everybody.
Cooper goes short towards Justin Morrow. Now it's played into space for Morrow to chip this one into the edge of the box. Hagglund with a header! Nick Hagglund climbing high! It's 3-2 for TFC, and it is tied 5-5 on aggregate. Once again, set pieces causing problems for Montreal. What a night at BMO Field.
Montreal cannot defend this well. They only put one guy out. Piatti gets a 2v1 situation. Adoro should come back there.
And it's chipped in, and he attacks it from the penalty spot.
Magnificent run and jump, getting his header down. Outstanding goals from Nick Hagglund. Montreal.
And so I'm in beer station. There's it's beer station, so half the people don't even know that they're in a bar. And then I remember it was me and one other guy just screaming at the television watching this thing. And then I believe in I think right at the start of extra time or right before the end of full time, Giovinco goes down.
Yes.
I believe he had to be subbed out.
The first extra time period, cramping costs him. And it's Benoit Cheyrou who comes in.
The vet. Benoit Cheyrou, who would have been 36 at the time of this game, is his second last year of his career. Been playing since 1999 in the pros.
That's amazing.
And of course, it's Cheyrou who scores the winner.
Joining the attack as well as it's played backwards for Bradley. Bradley for Altidore. Out for Beitashour on the right. Beitashour with a good ball into the middle. A stooping header. And it's in. It's Benoit Cheyrou just off the bench for the injured Giovinco. And he puts Toronto FC in front in extra time.
Well, we talked about his big game experience. You know, it'll be a calming influence. We didn't expect him to get forward. With a run into the box, beautifully timed. He just gets there and stops.
Unreal. And then they score a minute later. Tosaint Ricketts scores in the 100th minute. Toronto takes the 5-2 lead, 7-5 in aggregate. I still feel like we're underselling it. This was like absolute pandemonium, the back and forth of this game.
Yeah, it's one of my go-to watch the highlights on YouTube games, because the fact it's from Montreal, the fact as you said, it's just like a rainy, miserable night, kind of just adds to all the drama of it. And then like by the time Cheyrou scores, it's pouring rain and like Giovinco's out and it's extra time. Like it's the most dramatic thing. It's amazing.
Osorio hammers it downfield. It's over on the most incredible of nights. Toronto FC, Eastern Conference champions. They will host MLS Cup at BMO Field. A night 10 years in the making.
And it launches them. I think, as somebody, again, sort of the casual opinion, this game gets you ready for them to play Seattle in the MLS Cup. If you had passing knowledge of Toronto FC, if you were sort of a fan, if you had never watched them before and you were in the city, like your point, bars were packed, people were talking about it. The way that they won this game against Montreal was it was the Kawhi shot for this team, where it was like, okay, you have to see this. You cannot miss what these guys are doing. This is a team of destiny, is how it felt.
Yeah. And like we were kind of talking last week about how they were sort of also Rans in the city and they were never good and all the things that we talked about sort of like the last 2 weeks. This was like even though they lose the cup, it sort of was like the culmination of like, okay, now it's a thing.
An awesome time. And it does kick off, as you said, an incredible season. And it sets them up to take on the Seattle Sounders in the MLS Cup Final in Toronto, a bitterly cold BMO Field on December 10th, 2016. We'll talk about that game next time on Sportsfeld Storytime.